This is Lucy James speaking for Alessandro Falari. The opening hours of Resident Evil 3 are incredibly effective at putting you on edge. Placing the volatile and intense conflict between protagonist Jill Valentine and the unrelenting force of nature, the Nemesis, front and center, the remake of the 1999 game presents some strong survival horror moments that show off the best of what the series can offer. But after that solid start, it becomes clear that this revisit to a bygone era not only loses track of the type of horror game that Resident Evil once was, but also loses sight of what made the original so memorable. RE3 is very much a companion piece to Resident Evil 2, serving as a simultaneous prequel and sequel that caps off the saga in Raccoon City. The remake of Resident Evil 3 interprets the classic survival horror through a modern lens, redesigning locations and altering key events to fit a significantly revised story. It doesn't deviate too much from the formula set by its predecessor, but it does have a more pronounced focus on action horror. Returning protagonist Jill Valentine is a capable survivor, and she's well suited to handle the undead and other bioweapon monstrosities like Nemesis that roam the city. Along with dodging attacks, she can also pull off slow-mo evasive rolls that open a clean shot at the enemy's weak point, which can be especially satisfying to pull off during an intense encounter. While this ultimately gives you a greater feeling of control in the field, it's not enough to the point where it makes these encounters with the ravenous undead or Nemesis easy. RE3's introduction is a strong one, conveying a creeping sense of paranoia and dread that's synonymous with the series, and Jill Valentine once again proves herself to be a confident protagonist to take everything head on. You'll eventually cross paths with supporting characters like mercenary Carlos Oliveira, the game's second playable character, along with some other unsavory individuals looking to take advantage of the chaos for their own ends. The key players also get their own big moments throughout the plot, which feel earned and are fun to see play out. But disappointingly, RE3's story reaches its conclusion after a brisk 6-hour campaign, which is made worse by a lackluster finish that left me wanting. While this is comparable to the 1999 game, the shrinking scope of the remake's campaign after its great opening makes the short run all the more clear. Still, RE3 possesses an impeccable level of detail for the locations and action during its brief campaign. One of my favorite areas of the game is set in downtown Raccoon City, which shows off the best that the remake has to offer. As an expansive map, it not only presents diverse locations packed with plenty of undead, it also displays the dynamic nature of the game's true star, the Nemesis. During these moments, the game's antagonist actively stalks and follows you into places you once thought were safe, bending the unspoken rules of engagement in survival horror to establish its presence further. Nemesis makes the tyrant from RE2 come across as a fedora-wearing goon, and even when you find yourself in a safe space, you can catch a glimpse of the villain waiting outside for you to leave, which still stands as some of the most unnerving moments in the game. However, as the game goes on, it becomes clear that Resident Evil 3 struggles to maintain a good pace. Just when you're getting accustomed to a location, a story beat will occur that will bring you to the next area, preventing your return. Puzzles are also infrequent, which puts more of its focus on exploration and combat that becomes a bit stale towards the end of the game. There are some moments where the game's strengths for action and horror shine, but generally its attempts to balance both can come across as hollow, and at its worst, they can be jarring. This is especially true with the many elaborate set-piece encounters where you control Jill as she navigates Uncharted-like sequences. They often result in tonal whiplash, as you typically transition back into the slower survival horror pacing right after. This is the most evident in the portrayal of the game's primary antagonist. Nemesis is at its best when stalking you in the streets, but these sections, while terrifyingly engaging, are fleeting. In actuality, Nemesis only actively hunts you during the opening section in downtown Raccoon City, with other encounters thereafter tied to scripted sequences and boss fights. The Nemesis is undoubtedly one of the most iconic villains of the series, and it's frustrating to see how the remake locks away one of the game's biggest assets behind uninteresting encounters. After you finish the campaign, Resident Evil 3 opens up a bonus shop in the main menu that lets you purchase new costumes and extra items with credits gained from completing challenges. While these can be fun for a revisit, there isn't much else in the way of bonus content to keep you going. Resident Evil 3 also comes packed with the team-based online mode Resistance. Looking back on my first playthrough of the RE3 remake, it was clear that the game reached its peak early and slowly lost momentum going forward. When looking at the remake's shortcomings, it's difficult not to think back to the original game. While this won't mean much for newcomers, it is still apparent that the shrinking scale of the game diminishes the impact of its plot and events. As a remake, Resident Evil 3 not only falls short of honouring its source, but it also doesn't quite stick the landing when offering a solid standalone horror experience. Even without taking into account the original game or even its predecessor, RE3 struggles to keep up with its pace amid a clashing of elements from survival horror and standard action. It actively tries to have both in conflicting ways and doesn't succeed as well as it could have with either. While it does have a strong start and does give its principal villain some great moments, this truncated retelling of one of the last classic Resident Evil games isn't able to do it proper justice.